Evil dies tonight!
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Cinema Trip Reviews. I am Wyatt, and today on the show, I'm going to be talking about The Exorcist Believer. If you haven't already, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Go check us out on Twitter and Instagram at Cinema Trip Reviews. Also, wherever you get your podcasts, drop in and leave us a good review there as well. And if you haven't already, make sure to go back and check out our Exorcist review featuring the guys from Movie Dumpster. Had an absolute blast getting to hang out with them, talking about one of the greatest movies of all times. Definitely go check that out. Highly recommend it. Unfortunately, I can't say the same about this movie, and I am talking about The Exorcist Believer. It is directed by David Gordon Green, who, directed the Blumhouse Halloween trilogy. I myself was a huge fan, am a huge fan of Halloween 2018. It is definitely on my, annual Halloween, watch list. I have grown quite fond of Halloween 2018. Kills is a fun slasher movie, and I take it at that. The story itself isn't very great. Ends is a complete fucking mess, which I already did a review of that. If you haven't already, definitely go back and check that one out. And like everybody else, I didn't really expect too much out of this movie whenever it was originally announced. I heard that they're making an Exorcist movie directed by David Gordon Green, and it's going to be another legacy sequel where they're bringing back a returning character from the original film, just like Halloween. And I was like, oh, great, what does that mean? And then they announced Ellen Burstyn's coming back as Chris MacNeil, and I was like, oh God, why? What are you doing? And just like a lot of people, I had really no hope for this movie. And for anybody that's followed the channel, I like to keep an open mind. I don't like to go into a movie, looking to bash on it. I try to see the good movies no matter how bad they are, and I try not to go into a movie trying to shit on a movie. I never try to do that. I try to see the good in these types of things. But boy, is it hard to find anything good about this movie. I don't know where to start with this movie, so I guess we'll start with the cast. First off, you got Leslie Odom Jr. here. As he's the one of the main characters. He's the driving force of this movie. I would say he's probably one of the best parts about this movie overall. I think he does a really good job in this. You got Ann Dowd, who I feel like she plays the same character in every fucking movie, and she's just comes off as so corny, which is a lot of this movie in general. But I don't know. I'm just not sold on Ann Dowd. I feel like she plays the same thing in every movie that she's in, and I don't know. It's just something about her. I don't know. But you got Lydia Jewett and Olivia O'Neill as the possessed children of the movie. And of course you have Ellen Burstyn coming back as Chris MacNeil, and boy, I will be getting into that big time here in a minute. So if you couldn't figure it out already, here's the gist of the movie. Two girls go missing for a couple days. They end up coming back, start acting really strange. Parents are kind of go through these steps trying to figure out what's going on with them. Turns out, of course, they're possessed by demons. Those damn demons. Fucking Pazuzu is at it again. And, of course, they got to go through all the steps, the religious routes to, exorcise the demons. It's a pretty basic plot, what you would expect of a possession and exorcism type movie. Now, the bad thing about a possession exorcist type movie, it has been done so many hundreds and thousands different ways. It is hard to do this type of movie and keep it fresh, and to do something different that hasn't been done before. And the big thing is, none of them since the original Exorcist has come even close to being The Exorcist. And I know probably a lot of people, well, you shouldn't be comparing all these other movies to The Exorcist. It's a different beast. Well, yeah, this movie tries to be The Exorcist in certain areas. And of course, knowing David Gordon Green, and if you watch the Halloween trilogy, you do have a handful of Easter eggs and callbacks in there. Some work better than others. Some just come off cringy as all hell. And you're like, okay, they kind of really forced that in there just to be like, oh, remember this? That you got to have them member berries in there for, the fans. But the real fans of these movies are pretty much just rolling their eyes. It works with Halloween because you have 12 or 13 different movies, and they're all somewhat different, and they're slashers, and they're all campy pretty much, and you can do all those kind of different things. The Exorcist is just a whole different beast entirely. It's harder to do. It's harder to get away with those sort of things without coming off cringy or just or coming off forced, David Gordon Green tries his best to try to make this feel like an Exorcist movie, and sometimes it does in maybe that first hour or so. It does in certain areas. He tries some of those slow camera zooms or pull outs. but it just doesn't, it comes off too clean. You know, it's very corporate Hollywood, AAA, you know, it comes off very clean and pristine. It's not dirty or gritty. It doesn't have it doesn't have like a gritty feel to it, kind of like the original Exorcist does in a way. You know, of course that movie was made in the 70s, but I believe you could have found a way to do that here in modern day. I mean, we get modern movies all the time that have a feel and a look of an old retro movie. I mean, he just did it with Halloween Kills with that flashback in the beginning. Like, you found a way to create that feeling of the original 78 movie. Why weren't you able to do that with this one possibly? I think it would have maybe benefited it in a way, but even so, with the story and how messy the writing is, it still would have probably been a train wreck, to be honest. And that's the thing about David Gordon Green. And this is going to be a wild comparison, but hear me out. I feel like David Gordon Green and Rob Zombie, two vastly different directors, looking at both of their work, I think they're good directors. I think they're very good filmmakers. They know what they want as far as a scene and how they want it shot, and they're really good at putting their movies together. They look good, they sound good. The only problem is the writing is terrible and they're sloppy and messy. So I've been saying this about Rob Zombie for years now, and it's even more apparent with David Gordon Green right now, is if you had a really good writing team behind both of these directors, they could be making some really fucking good movies. The problem is both these directors want a hand in the writing themselves and want to kind of flesh out their own stories, and that's really where it gets mucky and gross. And into the story itself, I mean, like I mentioned, two girls get possessed. I mean, you really only follow the single father played by Leslie Odom Jr. in this movie. I mean, the other girl and her parents, they're there here and there, but you don't really know anything about them other than that they go to church and they're very religious. You don't really get the backstory of the one girl and her family like you do with, you know, Leslie Odom Jr. and his daughter, where it's like all those years ago, he was in Haiti with his wife, you know, during that, and then there's an earthquake that happened. The mother gets seriously hurt. He has to decide between saving, you know, the unborn baby or saving his wife's life. And then it cuts 13 years later and his daughter's all grown up and he's a single father. And then it really just hangs on him and his daughter a majority of the movie, but you have this other, you choose to have another girl being possessed, but you barely show her or her family life at all. All you know is that they're religious and go to church. That's about it. And I mean, the movie's only like 2 hours long, and it's like they go through all these plot points super fast, super fast. Because as soon as you start to get to know these characters, that's when the girls end up going missing. They're gone for 3 days, as you see in the trailer. And it's typical Blumhouse, you know, and Universal giving away damn near everything in the movie in the trailers themselves. You see all of this in the trailer, and it's absolutely ruins the movie. They did it for all the Halloween movies. They're doing it for pretty much every movie going forward at this point. So, I mean, you know a lot of the huge plot points in the trailer if you watched it. But the girls go missing. They come back after 3 days. They start acting real funky. And they do a couple tests on them, but the one mother of the one girl just instantly goes, you know, I think they're possessed by the demons. We gotta figure out how to get them demons out. We gotta exorcise them. And it's like, really? That was really quick that you just drew that conclusion. You know, you just instantly like, oh, they're possessed. We gotta figure out how to get them unpossessed. And that's where, you know, the one nurse comes into play. Ann Dowd plays her. And I know they're saying that nobody's ever seen anything like this, but I read a book and I believe you should read this book. And of course, it's Chris MacNeil's book. And that's where, you know, Chris MacNeil comes into play in his story. And they literally and figuratively butcher her character. I have no clue how David Gordon Green and his writing team could have watched that original Exorcist movie from 1973 or whatever and thought that this character would have went in this direction. It just absolutely blows my mind the malpractice they had in this writer's room behind this character. Because just watching this as a huge fan of the original, you would just not... There's no belief in this. I do not believe that this character would be at this point in her life doing what she's doing and going forward with what's going to happen in this film. They absolutely wasted her. Ellen Burstyn, it just seems like she didn't want to be there at all. She only came back and took the money to kind of donate to a scholarship for up-and-coming actors and actresses. She only did it for the money to help out other people. Otherwise, she turned it down. But after doing a couple tests, they decided it was an exorcism, so they go and enlist Chris MacNeil's help because her daughter was possessed. So what has Chris MacNeil been doing all these years? Well, she wrote a tell-all book not long after the exorcism, explaining everything, telling the whole world about the exorcism. Her own daughter, Regan, wrote her completely off, hasn't talked to her in damn near 50 years because she was so mad about her doing so. And Chris MacNeil has went on to become an expert in exorcisms, apparently. She's not an exorcist herself, but she's become an expert in exorcisms. Just because her daughter was possessed at one point, she wanted to learn absolutely everything about them. Even though she didn't even see the exorcism, she didn't have a part in it, which, believe me, she makes a point of going out and saying, and that's just completely just blowing up online if anybody hasn't seen this already, about the patriarchy of the Catholic Church stopped her from being in the room during the exorcism. It's like, no, it wasn't the patriarchy. It was more so they didn't want you in the room because of your emotional ties to the possessed person, to your daughter. They didn't want you in there because of what she could possibly say to get under your skin and get you to do certain things. It was for the benefit of you and your child, for you to not be in the room during the exorcism. And it's also a weird thing for her to say, given that both those priests gave their lives to save your child. That little scene just proves how fucking bad the writing is in this movie. And it gets absolutely even worse, not just for her character, because they completely butcher her, but the movie itself. As soon as she gets introduced, it just takes a straight nosedive into the depths of hell itself. And from that point on through the rest of the movie, it was just a mixture of me rolling my eyes and checking my watch to see exactly how much longer this movie was. Because, I mean, I've never walked out of a movie, but man, I wanted to, because this movie just got so bad. It just turns into the most corporate play-by-numbers, horror movie out there at that point. And that's not what The Exorcist is at its core. The original Exorcist is a drama at its core, and it just happens to revolve around this, possessed little girl. I mean, the movie is about, Damien Karras, losing his religion. He's going through a hard time losing his mother and everything. He's not sure if he wants to be a priest anymore. And then you have Chris MacNeil, who has all this going on with her daughter. She's not religious at all. She leaves no stone unturned to try to figure out what is wrong with her daughter until she has to turn to the church, something she hasn't really believed in her whole life. There's a lot of depth to those characters in the original movie, and the whole movie is about following them and figuring out. It's not about the possession itself. It's following those characters, and that's what makes the original just so fucking great. It's not about Regan and being possessed. It's about the Exorcist, Damien Karras, and the characters of the movie itself. This movie is not that. You're getting every horror movie you've seen recently in the past 10 or 15 years. You're getting cheap jump scares. You're getting weird demons just kind of hiding behind people and then disappearing. It's like a mix of Insidious and The Conjuring just combined with The Exorcist in a way, because I know like in the Insidious you have like the other world that they go to with like souls and stuff. I thought they were going that route in this movie. This movie had a very Insidious-y type feel to it at certain spots, especially when they start talking about the girls going to hell and everything. I don't know. I didn't like it one bit because it was definitely treading into the water of Insidious and Conjuring and some of this James Wan stuff. And I think this movie could have possibly had potential at certain spots. I mean, the strongest part of the movie was that first hour, I do say, when it actually, in certain spots, actually had some atmosphere. It had some creepiness to it, very light creepiness, mind you, but it actually had some atmosphere at certain spots throughout that first hour. And I think they should have just dove into that even more. Now, I, for one, don't want to see any, like, Exorcist, requels, sequels, prequels, what have you. I don't really want to see anything other than just the original Exorcist and Exorcist 3. But if you had to, I would have gave it to A24, because I think with the atmosphere and the darkness that A24 can kind of immerse viewers in, it would have been perfect for The Exorcist. And I think you had a little spots here and there in that first hour of this movie before it really went downhill fast. This movie was just an absolute mess all around, and there was way too many characters that have zero depth to them, and they make you seem like they're supposed to be important. And then when something happens to them, you don't care about them because they kind of just showed up out of nowhere and there's no depth to them whatsoever. Case in point, there's a priest that comes up about 3/4 of the way through the movie. You haven't seen him at all before, and they act like he's supposed to be this huge, important piece of this exorcism. And, he declines because the church told him, no, we don't have enough evidence. We don't want you to go through the exorcism or what have you. So he's like, yeah, I can't be a part of it. They kind of end up guilt tripping him into it. And of course he comes back. I'm not going to go into spoilers or what have you, but you don't care about this priest at all. He's not built up, but they expect you to care about this guy that they just, introduced into the movie that has barely any lines. And that's the case with most of the characters in this movie. I mean, the only character you follow majority of the time is Leslie Odom Jr. And I mean, not even his daughter. I mean, his daughter is definitely the main one out of the possessed girls, but you really only follow him and his daughter. The other family you really don't give a fuck about. And they expect to make 2 more movies off of this? Like, how? I after when this movie ended, that was my first thought. It's like, they're gonna make 2 more movies off of this? How are they going to even do that? How are they going to justify continuing this storyline? I mean, I don't know if we're even going to get to that point based off of the terrible reception of this movie. Now, I'm going to get into some spoilers here quick before we go, because I want to try to keep this review short. Now, the butchering of Chris MacNeil, I got to get into it. They made this lady who went through this, who had her daughter go through all of this. She becomes obsessed and wants to be an expert on exorcisms, even though she had no hand in the exorcism that was performed on her daughter. Like, you would think you would want to try to distance yourself away from that as far as possible after the traumatic events of that, that you went through. Why would you want to devote your life to try to, learn everything about it and everything? And especially since you're not a priest and you're not going to be performing exorcisms, what would be the real reason of you doing that in the long run? You would think that over 50 years of her, learning and becoming the expert of exorcisms, she would know a lot better and know what to do whenever the time comes to have an exorcism. Well, the first chance she gets when she comes up against, one of the possessed girls, she goes in there, tries to do her thing, tries to expel the demons, and she easily falls for the oldest trick in the book by a demon. This demon just like, oh, I'm back to normal. I'm just going to go sit in bed. And she just lets her guard down. She thinks that what she said immediately worked and that this child is fine. She lets her guard down. And then this little girl stabs her in the eyes. This little girl literally stabs her in the eyes with a crucifix. And Chris MacNeil loses her eyes. And she's blinded for the rest of this movie, and she's turned into like a Charles Xavier type character in the hospital bed with her eyes, taped shut. But she's like, she can feel what's happening during the exorcism and everything. She's like a psychic medium now. It's like, how does any of this make sense whatsoever? You were just straight butchering this character. You took a character that had so much depth and has been through so much shit in that original movie, and you just brought her back for nothing. You brought her back literally to treat this character like shit, man. And it's just like, how could you do this? What was your original thought behind doing this? Why would nobody stop this from happening whenever this movie was originally pitched, or when this idea was pitched to bring her back? It makes absolutely zero sense for them to do this with this character. And I just couldn't believe it. And I mean, it's like, you should have just killed her then. And that way I wouldn't have had to see what happens later in the movie, I thought my eyes were going to get stuck in the back of my head because they rolled so hard. I was like the Robert Downey Jr. meme, man. Because at the very end of the movie, after everything is all said and done, right before it goes to credits, who goes and visits her in the hospital? You got Linda Blair coming back for a 2-second cameo. Get the fuck out of here, man. Like, you think that's what I came here to see? Like, I don't know if that was just a setup for sequel bait, that maybe Reagan was going to be involved in the next one or so, but I really don't care. I really don't care. My eyes roll back so hard. Like, I knew it was going to happen. I knew it was coming. It was just a matter of when, not if. I just couldn't believe that they wrote this movie to be that predictable and that messy. And with the movie being as predictable as it is to the audience, the characters in the movie should have saw some of these things coming as well. Case in point, during the exorcism, the two children possessed by one demon, you would assume it's Pazuzu. You never get an answer of what demon is possessing these children. The children give the parents a decision. Only one of us can live. You have to choose. As the viewer, knowing that the demon is going to trick you. It's out there to trick you. It did in the original movie. It has in damn near every single movie that deals in demonic possession and exorcism. I knew as soon as they would choose one of these children, the devil was going to take the other one. It was going to kill the other one. And sure enough, it did. And I knew it was going to happen. And somehow these priests, the people that are religious, had no idea that these demons were going to be out to try to trick them whatsoever. You sure about that? You sure about that? And at the very end, you know, they go and say, it's not just about religion. It's about people coming together for the greater good. You know, a bunch of people together, working together is better than just one. You know, you got to have hope. And it's like, well, what good is hope and what good is people coming together when a demon's just going to kill one of these kids regardless? Like, your hope and your prayers and all this aren't going to do a damn thing whenever you're too dumb that you get tricked by a demon. I don't know. It's just, I have no idea what they were trying to do with this or what direction they're trying to take with this story. So like I said, this movie comes off very preachy. I mean, this movie comes off super preachy. They're pushing religion constantly throughout this movie. And it's like you could have found a way to insert some of these messages, not subliminally, but like you could have inserted them a little more cleverly throughout the movie instead of just being just in your face about it. And speaking of in your face, they did insert some of those, you know, those little flashes, subliminal flashes of demons during out the movie. It wasn't nearly as clever or as quick as the original Exorcist. I would easily say those are probably some of the creepiest shots of this movie, or some of those weird demon faces inserted in there. But they're not nearly as cleverly done. And you can kind of tell when they're going to be popping up, and you can tell when there's going to be a jump scare. This movie at its core was just so predictable, and it was so by the numbers as far as most horror movies nowadays. And it's just so, I don't know. It's what you would expect from a AAA, you know, corporate horror movie nowadays. It's what you can expect out of like a new Insidious or a new Conjuring or any type of these movies that are coming out. They're all somewhat the same at its core. I mean, it sucks because there's no originality, and I hate to be that dude that echoes some of these Twitter thoughts like there's no originality in Hollywood anymore. It's all sequels and remakes and requels, and it's like, there's kind of some truth in there at its core when you're not doing anything original with these ideas. Now, obviously, I'm not in support of doing an Exorcist sequel or prequel or whatever, but if you're going to do one, bring some new ideas to the table. Do something different with it. Do something new with it. The Exorcist 3 is a great movie. I love The Exorcist 3. But notice how in The Exorcist 3, it doesn't do damn near the same story as the first one. There is no possessed little girl in The Exorcist 3. You're following a cop that just lost one of his best friends tragically, and he's following a case, and it just happens to deal with some possession at some form. Oh my God, if you haven't seen Exorcist 3 by now, definitely go out and check that movie out. It's far superior than this one, by far. But what I'm saying, but that's what I'm trying to say, they did something different with The Exorcist 3. It wasn't just, oh, it's a little girl being possessed and you're going by the paint by numbers type thing. They did something different. And that was years ago now. That was so many years ago they did Exorcist 3. You think you would have been able to do something different with it by now. But we've been how many Exorcist sequels deep? We've been how many just horror movies in general doing these types of movies, and they never do anything different with them. It's always the same shit. And until they start doing something different with it, these movies are going to keep doing terrible. Honestly, after this, I don't want a sequel to this movie at all. I don't want anything Exorcist related after this. Because this, after this movie, it should have, turned enough people off from The Exorcist to go forward with something else. But I mean, all in all, I cannot recommend The Exorcist Believer at all. David Gordon Green, I think, should probably go back and start doing some more comedies. I don't really want to see him involved in any horror movies going forward unless he has another writing team behind him. He's not writing the movies himself. Then maybe I would watch. Well, hopefully they don't greenlight the sequel to this one. That way, this one can just kind of come out and just kind of disappear into the ether at that point. That way, it's never to be heard of again. We won't talk about this one going forward. Just go back and watch the original Exorcist, and if you haven't, definitely go watch The Exorcist 3, a far superior Exorcist sequel than any of the other ones that have come out since. But that is a review for today. I definitely went on a little longer than planned. This Friday, Friday 13th, we have a brand new review coming out. Me and Alex are reviewing Friday 13th, Part 3 and Part 4, the final chapter. Be on the lookout for that one. That'll drop Friday the 13th at 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Like always, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Go check us out on Twitter and Instagram at Cinema Trip Reviews. Also, check us out wherever you get your podcast. Drop in and leave us a good review there as well. And we'll see everybody later.